I think they're playing our songs, Gary.
I love the new opener. Is that you playing?
No.
Oh,
Dylan put it together for us. So it's another home run. It's just another opener. Welcome, everybody. We are so excited to have each and every one of you here this evening, here on the interview room. I have to be honest with you, this week has been, I got sick again. I don't know what's going on with my immune system, but this whole week through turkey time and everything, I was pretty much out of service. And today is actually one of the first days where I'm starting to feel, myself again. But that said, welcome, Dr. Gary Brucato. So great to have you here. Thank you again.
Of course, the honor is mine.
Yeah, and for those of you who do not know Dr. Brucato, he is the author of The New Evil. If you've not ordered it, it is a great Christmas gift this year. I love plugging your book for you. You can get it on Amazon, and it is The Understanding of the Emergence and Modern Violent Crime. And Dr. Michael Stone and Dr. Brucato wrote it, and it hit the charts pretty fast. And it went to the #1 spot for a while, and now it's hopefully climbing back up there. So if you've not gotten it for your friends or your family or yourself, put your seatbelt on. It's a great read. We want to thank our mods, everybody, Mimi J2, Teresa M, Miss Sophia, and Laura. We're so grateful for each and every one of you. We're so appreciative of you guys all being here, and Mimi J2, of course. We love you very, very much. And of course, our subscribers, our members, and our Patreon members. Without you, we can't continue to produce the programs that we do. Okay, we've got a lot to cover tonight. I'll tell you, this JonBenet Ramsey thing is lit up again, thanks to Netflix. And, for the record, first of all, and Gary, you tell me what you're thinking, but Gary and I are not here tonight to solve the crime, #1. Okay, I just want to put that out front. Let's be mindful and respectful to the situation at hand. There is a great program on Netflix about the JonBenet Ramsey case. In full disclosure, Gary knows I was involved in this situation with Lou Smith back in when it first started, when he first got involved in the case. I was asked to look into some things in California for him. It made the newspapers all over the place back in the day. And, I'll just show you a quick article. Let's see here. View this tab. All right, that may be the right one. There it is. All right, so he had contacted our agency in Southern California. I was assigned to look into it. And so back in the day, this is actually the first time I've really, we're going to get into this. And I've not said much to anything or anybody other than my department back in the time. But pretty much all the information is, out there, and it has been for quite some time. Essentially, there was a gentleman that had been arrested in our community, and Lou Smith had been brought in by the DA's office at the time. He had his infamous list of individuals that they wanted to find. And long story short, our agency had one of those individuals who had fled the neighborhood shortly thereafter JonBenet's murder. And so our agency was contacted at the time due to my background in child sex offenders, those who would kill kids. I was contacted to follow up and try to identify where this individual was and identify any other paperwork that may be available from a caper he had committed in our city. And ultimately, the information was put together. We referred them to the California Department of Justice for some additional follow-up. And we then packaged up what we had. I sent it up the chain of command, and then it went back over to the case file. So somewhere in that case file, my reports are sitting. So when they get this perpetrator, it is maybe possible that, I could sit on the stand one day. You don't know. We just don't know. But what we're going to talk about tonight is and for the record, again, I just want to make sure that everybody is on the same piece of paper here, the same page tonight. Dr. Brucato and I are not here to solve the JonBenet Ramsey case, okay? So don't beat us up in the chat. Don't beat us up on the comment section. And it's okay to have an opinion. We're not a problem with that. I don't ever have a problem with that. But don't attack my professionalism or my experience. That comment will be deleted. I tell people right up front. I don't go into your house and tell you how to cut your turkey. Don't come into mine and tell me how to cut mine. That's just how it works. So I throw, and then the people will complain, you delete my comments. Yeah, you're right. Okay. And I'll continue to do it. So just don't be that guy. Okay. Don't be that guy. Continue to drive Uber or whatever you need to do, but just don't come into my house and do it. And the reason I say that, because this is a very volatile case. And, last week we had all kinds of things come out of the woodwork, during the week. And, we're not there to solve Brian Koberger's problem either. Okay? We were just, opining about a particular theory. And tonight what we're going to do is I'm going to bring real-time experience, i.e. I actually had many-hour conversations with Lou Smith because he was looking for certain people. And as a result of that, if I found those certain people, I had to know what I was talking about. And one of the things that he told me directly is the fact that the murder weapon back then was a garrote. Now, back in 1997, none of that information had floated around the public. Nobody knew that. And he also told us some other stuff. And I have always held on to that information internally. And I asked myself over the years, why in the world? The first question I would ask myself, and then I'm going to let Dr. Brucato speak, is why in the world would a 6-year-old be found in the basement of their house in the wine cellar? We can see it here on this diagram. And then the murder weapon end up being a sexual erotic tool. And then I asked myself, who inside of the environment would, one, know how to manufacture that garrote, and two, utilize it in such a fashion that it was utilized as a tool for gratification. Well, that's why there are so many questions about this, but I do believe, number one, I'm just going to say it right off the bat. The brother did not do this. The 9-year-old little boy. Whether you like me or not, That's okay. I'm good. Okay. It's okay to disagree, but don't attack me. Okay. I'm basing my opinion on my experience working murder and my experience working these types of murderers, guys that killed children. Okay. If anybody doubts the validity of that, just go watch my interview with Brandon Wilson, and that should close the door of that conversation. So that said, one of the reasons I have Dr. Brucato here tonight is because he has written a book about these types of individuals. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We are going to talk about not who did this, but the type of weapon that was utilized. And this is an artist rendition of the garrote around little JonBenet's neck. Okay, that said, Dr. Brucato, what say you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. And this rendering is horrifying when you realize that if the depiction is accurate, that whoever put this instrument of death around this child's neck would have been looking at a cross around her neck, which is deeply disturbing on many levels. So my thought is this: one of the things that you'll notice if you read the New Evil is that there are 22 categories there, but there is a kind of demarcation point between killing or committing other offenses because of something going on environmentally or situationally for the offender, and offenders who kill simply because something is in their personality or fantasy world. And once we spill over into people to do things based more in personality and fantasy, you notice immediately that these are people who do not commit offenses in a limited way, because the whole point is to kind of titillate the self over and over again, like taking a drug that you need higher and higher amounts of, or increase the excitement or perfect the fantasy. You're going to need to bear that point in mind as I make the comments I'm about to make. So first of all, it's important to remember that the cause of death in the Ramsey case was really two things. It was the ligature strangulation with a garrote, and also there was some bludgeoning. There was some cranial cerebral injury there that suggested, either the child was being strangled for probably psychosexual reasons with this garrote, and then was ultimately eliminated with bludgeoning to the head, or that there was bludgeoning as part of the process of tormenting the child, and then the ligature led to the death. But it's important to understand that the whole point of using a garrote would be the protraction of death, the slowness of the process. That is going to be very, very important for understanding motive here, the probable motive. So if you were to look through the annals of crime, and Chris, you and I have talked about this, you'd be very hard pressed to find more than a few cases in which somebody constructed a garrote to use in murder, and they are essentially invariably, in my experience, serial killers who are sexually sadistic. Now, what do I mean by sexually sadistic and serial killing? I mean a person who is going to repetitively kill the people that they target for fantasy reasons, and the idea is that the person is achieving a strange sexual gratification from whatever they're doing to the person. And for some of these offenders, asphyxiation is a very common method of slowly eliminating the victim and kind of enjoying it, watching the person suffer, the widening of the eyes, the potential screaming, the gasping, the whole thing is exciting. Whereas we would find it horrifying, there are some people who would actually become aroused by watching that. And so you immediately have to think, this is somebody who is not looking to quickly eliminate a person. This is a person who is going to enjoy watching that kind of suffering. So immediately we have to conclude that that is a choice that would be made by a person who was profoundly sadistic. Profoundly sadistic. Now, Chris, you would agree.
Before you get too far ahead, though, I love where you're going.
Right.
Okay, let's set the stage, first of all.
Uh-huh.
Okay, on that date and time when she was first discovered, right, that day. Okay, first of all, and I'm gonna do another show on this, but let's be honest with the world. And by the way, I've read all the reports. The first officer on the scene to this day believes that he made a mistake by not going down and opening the door in the wine cellar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that said, police work 101. Okay, and there are 1,000 decisions that have to be made in a case like this rapidly, even if it's a kidnapping, because that's how it came out, as a kidnapping. Okay. Well, the two main detectives that ultimately, landed on this thing, Arden, and then of course, Thomas, they had no experience. One was a juvenile detective, and that's why she got called to the scene, because there was a kidnapping potential of a juvenile. And the other was a narcotics detective. Okay. This was the first murder they'd had that year. And whenever you see the politicians giving a press conference, i.e. the mayor or the assistant mayor or whatever, that should be a huge red flag. The FBI got involved after everybody was on the scene. Initial response, because it was a, quote, kidnapping, and they wanted to put a trap on the phone, which they did. Now, here's the challenge. Okay. It was the house was 6,500 square feet. Okay. So what? I don't care if it was a football stadium. Every inch of that house should have been checked immediately. There is no excuse from a law enforcement perspective. The first thing they teach you in a missing child case, in the academy, by the way, is you go into the house, you look in every door, underneath every bed, behind every couch, and in every cupboard, because that's what kids do. They hide. Little kids hide. And then you go out and you go in and you do it again. And you keep doing it. Okay? And you keep doing it. Okay? And when all this was going down, there were so many mistakes being made that I got to be honest with you. When I've read all the reports and I've looked through everything, and I thought, holy crap, this could have been quickly discovered and handled correctly. Because had that door been open, and a law enforcement authority would have looked in and find that individual, and found JonBenet, 90% of all of this perception could have been resolved. Gary, thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think that the procedural stuff falls into your area. And I think those are all important points that should be taken into consideration. But I think that when we're looking at what was done to the child we walk away as people with expertise in this area, as behavioral sciences, John Douglas did, as other experts we know, as Lou Smith did, kind of collectively leaning toward that idea of some kind of intruder of the sex offending type being involved. And I think we could explain what leads us to think that, although of course, as you said, we're not here to solve, simply to opine. But I think, you know, we have to take into consideration some basic facts that could be divined from what was seen there. For example, Chris, the garrote, I think it's important to talk about the construction of the garrote, which would have been, you know, in other words, where's the rope come from? Does the person bring it, or is it from the house? You know, what is that stick that was used, which, by the way, is the origin of the word garrote. It refers to that stick that's needed. I think we need to explain, because of some comments I'm saying, what a garrote even is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Chris, I don't know if you want to explain it or I'll explain it, but,
No, I'll give the long, or the
yeah, like the quick.
it was an ancient. First of all, it was an ancient torture device.
Right.
Okay. They used to put people down in a chair. They would strap their arms to the chair's arms, and then there was a point that would stick out from a piece of pole. And if you've not seen any of the Inquisition torture, capabilities, this was a basic, Spanish Inquisition torture device. Right. And then they would put the person there, then they would strap their head back, and then they would twist this little knob, and it would start tightening up on their neck, and then that piercing mechanism behind their neck would pierce into their spinal column. And then it expanded into a military type of killing device, which, if the military still utilizes them today. They're wires with a bracelet on one side and a handle on the other, and you can put it around the subject and wrap it around them rapidly, and then you can just kind of tie your arms like that, and it will incapacitate them. So right. In this case, Gary, go ahead and pick it up from there.
Well, first of all, there are very few offenders that use these. John Wayne Gacy, the killer of young boys, favored the use of garrotes that were part of his so-called rope trick. And the idea for him was to get the boy to agree to some game or rope trick. And then the idea was, that he would wrap the rope around the neck of the child or the young man. And as the person was wriggling and trying to breathe, it was causing the rope to self-tighten. So that the person, he then would say outrageous things like, these kids killed themselves, implying that the garrote that had been put on them did it, not him, as he watched, and things like that. That's the kind of character who would use a garrote. Cruel, sadistic, the kind of person who wants to sit there and kind of observe what the person is experiencing. And in this particular case, the person did not bring the garrote like as part of a kit or anything. It appears that there was just some ambient stick, correct, Chris? Like a paint piece of it was like a paint stirrer or a paintbrush or some paint related piece of wood.
It was a paintbrush that was broken in three separate pieces.
Now one piece is missing.
One piece is still missing.
Used to make the garrote with the rope. Now I don't know, perhaps you do, if there's any reason to believe that rope was found or brought with the offender.
It was at the house.
Okay, so it is all ambient material?
Yes.
Okay, that's very important, right? Because a person with a fantasy that's highly specific will sometimes need extremely specific knots, extremely specific rope. Think of BTK, for example. One of the things that helped dissociate BTK from one of the cases that was being looked at as potentially linked to him recently, I think it was the Garber case, was how different the knots and the rope material were from what he favored and what he fantasized about. The idea being that it wouldn't have been the style of that kind of offender to just use some random rope right, that was around. It has to be very specific for arousal. And the other piece, if I'm not mistaken, Chris, the idea was that there was the thought that there was some insertion leading to injury, which is reported in the autopsy.
There was
some vaginal injury. Now, that is profoundly important. There are very few researchers, you can count on like two hands, that have done research on what is called FOI, foreign object insertion. Ann Burgess and Victor Protracted and I have studied that at Boston College. And it's research, I think, is still active for us. It's important to understand that that is something that would be done by a person with a very specific personality. There's really three kinds of specific personalities. One is a sadistic person who inserts the object for the purpose of maximizing pain and humiliation of the person. The second is an extremely inadequate person who does it because of the inability to perform when they come to the moment where they are playing out this kind of perverse, outrageous fantasy. And so the object compensates for the lack of ability or arousal that can happen there. Very sensitive material, we want to warn people. And the third is a person, I have seen cases or heard of cases where a person has some kind of puritanical, religious kind of idea. And the idea is that to use their own body as opposed to an object would be offensive to them. And I mean, it's outrageous, but it happens. So like, for example, in the Cameron Hooker case, there was a use of objects because he had made a vow to his wife that he would not penetrate the victim. So we see different kinds of things, but I think here what we can deduce is that this was likely part of an inadequate personality structure and a sadistic in a sadistic offender.
okay. Hang on, don't get too far ahead of us,
Right?
because those of you who are just joining with us tonight, we are just going to focus on this weapon.
Right.
This is the elephant in the living room. It has been for 30-something years, or whatever it's going to be. Okay? This is the elephant in the living room. We're looking at it. Forget the knots. We can figure out, everybody's got different theories about knots and all this other stuff. Okay? Where Lou was focused, in my opinion, and I think anybody who has had any type of experience with these types of offenders, okay, take the letter. That's all great. Okay, wonderful. Let that will set in itself. But the elephant in the living room is a 6-year-old little girl dead with a garrote around her neck. That's the elephant in the living room. Okay? I mean, Homicide 101 is you start with the victim and you don't investigate people, which was one of the huge problems that started the moment this detective with the kooky eyes, okay, saw the father coming up the stairs with the baby, and immediately she knew that he was the killer. Okay. Homicide 101. You don't investigate people, you investigate information. This is information. Okay. Information. And the internet should take a lesson here. Okay. This is information. So now you have to reverse engineer this information and ask yourself, who and why is this tool? This is a tool. Why did the offender create this tool and then apply it to the victim?
Right.
That's what we do. That's what John Douglas did. That's what Lou Schmidt did. Okay. What the investigators didn't do, day one, they were so sure of themselves that when John put the baby down, this kooky-eyed detective picked her back up Who taught this person to do that? She picked her back up and moved her again. And then she's, telling the world, I know who killed JonBenet. Well, really? You just transferred your fluids, hair, or whatever onto JonBenet potentially. And everybody wonders, well, there's all this hair and all this other stuff that's unaccounted for, et cetera. Well, no kidding. It could belong to, cuckoo eyes. Homicide 101, don't touch. Boy Scouts at the time were not tying these kind of knots, and the 9-year-old was in Cub Scouts. He was 9. Weeblos comes at 10. Boy Scouts comes at 11. He couldn't even be in Boy Scouts. Number 1. Okay. And so then we have to ask ourselves, if we're going to say it's a member of the family, why? Why? And I'm here to tell you, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. Gary, finish your thoughts. What do you think? What are you thinking?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand how much strength would have been necessary here with the bludgeoning to break a skull, to injure the skull like that, the turning of the garrote to ultimately eliminate somebody through that kind of asphyxiation takes time and power, time and strength. Wouldn't you agree, Chris? This is not something a little kid would do with ease. I mean, that you need some strength to do such a thing, right?
I raised an Eagle Scout, by the way. And I was a scout, but go ahead.
There you go. And so now a couple of things we want to bear in mind here is people are talking in the audience about the idea of this being staging. Now, I want to point a couple things out. First of all, I have said on this show and in many places that I was responsible for the term elimination murder. That is an idea that has been put out there by other people, but I think I was I was the first person to give it a name, that name, and I've written about it. It's in the New Evil and elsewhere as a kind of murder where the point is you need to get somebody out of the way for some reason or another. They're a witness, they're a burden, there's money to be made, they're in the way of an inheritance, they're in the way of a romance, whatever. And in elimination murders, almost invariably, it's almost characteristic of them that it's followed by staging, where a person who knew the person tries to make it look like an outside person did it. So let's say, for example, you have to eliminate a kid who knew too much in the family. So you eliminate them and then you try to make it look like an outsider did it. Okay. Even in those staged offenses, I have never, not once, have ever seen or heard about a case. And I am familiar with an absurd number of cases, as you know, Chris, in databases and elsewhere. And from personal experience of looking at cases, a case where in the staging of a crime, a family member applied a garrote and committed foreign object insertion with a stick to make it look like an offender broke in and did something to the child. That would be extra, an outrageous, unnecessary extra, which is right at the heart of the definition that Michael Stone and I have talked about of evil. It is the unnecessary extra, because evil comes from the Germanic übel, which means beyond or extra. It's the stuff you don't need to do to commit the offense, and a practical thing like getting someone out of the way or staging a crime. To do the extra means it's coming from your personality or it's coming from fantasy. So once we see the use of a garrote, where your thinking should be going is, this is somebody who is driven by a perverse, sadistic, sexual fantasy world. They thought about doing this to someone or this specific person for a while, and they have probably done it many times. Now, if you were to ask me who is, the top person you would go to with questions about child offenses, things like that, well, there's a few experts I would go to, actually, Chris. Ann Burgess, people like that. One of them is Dr. Anna Salter, I think the world of, who wrote a fabulous book called Predators. I think no true crime aficionado or aficionada would not have that book. And one of the things you learn when you read the book is that an offender who is sexually motivated will probably have, on average, about 150 victims by the time of apprehension. That doesn't mean killing 150 victims, but it means a lot of offenses of touching and doing things that are outrageous. Now, Chris, you know that to be true, correct? You would vouch for that to be true, right? You can get into triple and quadruple digits easily over some decades, correct?
Correct.
Easily. And why is that important? Because it means that probability is, unless this is the person's very first rodeo with this kind of offense, you can bet that this person probably did this a lot. And why is that important? Because then it raises the possibility of the person being on a registry, having gone to jail before, having come to the attention of authorities, being somebody that probably is out there somewhere on some registry somewhere or in some computer database somewhere and hasn't yet been linked to this particular offense. You know, Chris, how that goes, where there's thousands of cases that haven't been linked that probably have been committed by a small number of offenders that got around for a long time, sometimes even across state lines, right? I mean, you can vouch for that, right? Well, why is that important? Well, first of all, if you look at the work of experts like Ken Lanning, one of the great experts on child offenses,
Unbelievable,
one of the best, he would talk about how you really have to divvy up these kind of offenders into two categories. One is the groomer, the type that is sophisticated, intelligent, suave, identifies a vulnerability in the child, and then breaks down barriers to try to get the child to commit offenses, like we saw in the Soto case, what Stefan Stearns is accused of. I just watched today an excellent movie called Doubt, which some of you know was up for a lot of Oscars. Meryl Streep is the star, Viola Davis. What is it about? It's about a Catholic priest that is suspected of grooming a student at a Catholic school. And the movie is about all the doubt that is in the minds of people looking at this offender. And what is it that he does to develop a relationship with the child? Well, first of all, he singles out that the child is the only African-American boy in the entire school in the 1960s, right, when they're beginning to integrate schools. He gives him a present. He invites him personally to the rectory. The boy is given altar wine and goes back to class a little intoxicated or smelling of alcohol. He's acting very, very strangely. The priest tells a story that he was covering for the boy, that the boy had stolen altar wine, and he was protecting him by keeping it away from everyone else that the boy had done this. Well, why is that important? Because it's an excellent depiction of how grooming operates and how you isolate a child. I mentioned those details because I know that someone in the audience may have a child who's being groomed, or maybe someone who's been groomed even in an adult relationship to do things that are outside their comfort zone. You need to be aware of how these offenders operate. The other kind that Lanning talks about is an unsophisticated offender who can't talk and groom and so forth. And those kind of people tend to do things like open a car door and pull a kid in, go to a shopping mall, find a kid who's been separated from their parents and snatch them, break into a house and commit an offense and leave. And those are more disorganized people. There's a higher likelihood of them being mentally ill or peculiar at the very least. They're not good socially, right? So what I thought when I heard about the JonBenet case was, putting the facts together, I would posit a kind of odd, repetitive offender who targeted children or young people. The fact that the child was opposite sex is suggestive of someone who targets children. People who target teenagers, like hebephiles, like older teenagers, tend to favor same-sex victims. And I would posit somebody, because of the kind of disorganized, odd non-grooming quality that may very well have been fairly local, because those kind of offenders tend to be. So how do they find their victims? By seeing them. They see them somewhere out in the world, at church, walking down the street, outside of their school, and they follow them and they fixate on them and then kind of break in the house and do what they're going to do, or snatch the kid. Now, the other things that argue for a kind of disorganized oddball who didn't really play out a perfect fantasy exactly as he wanted is that he used ambient things that were in the house. He used ambient things that were just around in the house. So the other thing is, this child, and we have to talk, and this, Chris, I really want to hear your thoughts on this, but I think you would agree that any intelligent investigation would begin with victimology. And we have to talk about what made this child high profile. And I mean, like a high target, that is to say, a high target. And what is it that about this pageantry that she was involved in that can be risky in terms of attracting the kind of offender that I'm thinking, and I don't know if you agree with me, may very well have been involved here. Now, first of all, do you agree with the kinds of things, the kind of offender I'm positing? Sadistic, inadequate sex offender with probably a long history.
Yeah, and if we just first begin with this idea, like you're saying, what's the contact point, right? That's what we would call it. Right. What are the contact points potentially for the suspect and the victim, and taking into account that victimology? What's really ironic, and where investigators, in my opinion, got caught up, and they're still caught up. Okay? And the media just exploded with the information. Now, mind you, back in the 90s, these, beauty pageants were going all over the place, all over the country. They weren't just exclusive to Boulder, Colorado and the Ramsey family. In fact, if you looked at the video of, some of the local beauty pageants that were taking place, it was usually a dance studio or something like that, where even my daughter was involved in those things. Okay. I mean, and here's the irony of this. It's as if, mom was pimping the child out to the world. Well, what about the other 15 other girls on the stage? Whatever happened to them? Are they, were their parents doing the same thing? No. The answer is no. Absolutely 100% not. Okay. And in this situation, you have a little girl whose mom is recovering from, ovarian cancer, and she's trying to cram life in. Okay? And now that little girl is found down in a basement with this item around her neck. Okay. So we have to leap from, the beauty pageants to, what? Christmas morning, I might as well strangle my daughter with a garrote. Okay. And that's how Kooky Eyes was thinking, that the family, the Kooky Eyes was thinking, the same one who made no mistakes, yet picked up the body and moved her into another room. That's mistake 1,259. Okay. Because I've got her, I'm going to go over her stuff over the next couple of days. It's just crazy to watch that, or to have read all of that stuff. And then think back and go, well, wait a minute, here's the elephant in the living room. This is the elephant in the living room. I mean, when we look at this paintbrush, the suspect took the time, number one, let's look where the victim is located.
Mm-hmm.
The victim is located in this wine cellar right here, down at the bottom. Okay. Where this paintbrush and the information, where the garrote is made, is up here in this, hobby room. So the suspect either has her in this room and has to move her back into here and then do his business, or her, his business. It's not going to be a woman. Okay.
Agreed.
Do you
Absolutely. Based on I mean, there's a few things that make me think it, but the simplest reason being the statistics on these kind of offenders are they're males.
Exactly. So the suspect is going to control her all the way back into this room. And this is ultimately where she is killed. And the reason we know that she's alive is for obvious reasons with the medical examiner's report. The medical examiner's report says she has petechiae in both eyes. One a little bit less than the other, but what that means is the blood vessels were breaking because the heart was pumping, meaning she's alive. So whoever is applying this instrument is taking her in and out of consciousness. And when you look at some of the marks on her, and this is an artist's rendition, you see this mark here on the left side of her neck. That is the garrote moving towards the neck. Okay, what it does is it pulls and it leaves an abrasion into the skin. And I read the autopsy reports again, just to make sure I was reading all of this correctly. And when you think about that, this is an evil, sadistic personality.
Yes.
Okay. It is not a father acting weird. Okay. He was just weird. Well, have you looked at Cuckoo Eyes? She looks weird. If I was sitting across from that and my kid had disappeared, I would have been going, she's weird. Okay. And lo and behold, it turns out that when you read her report, and I'm going to throw a lot of this at her tonight because she screwed this thing up so badly. Okay. And while the dad is walking up the stairs with the child, she's reaching for her shoulder holster underneath, as if she's going to get killed with a whole room full of friends and family and cops all over the neighborhood. It's just bizarre how this thing went down. It's bizarre. And when I heard this for the very first time back when it happened, when Lou Schmidt was brought in, I just scratched my head and I said to him, I said, Lou, what is the murder weapon? And he showed me, we had a conversation about a garrote and how it was manufactured. And I thought to myself, okay, I see why you're headed this way. Okay. I see why you're headed this way.
Smart guy.
Very smart. And so now, Gary, what's the other elephant in the living room here? And from your opinion, what do you think? And I'm going to tell everybody tonight what I think this case could be solved lickety split.
There are a few things you could mean when you say the other elephant in the living room. So I'd rather you define it.
Okay.
But I think the other thing that you're going to have to get into for people who are questioning the notion of torture here is that there are other marks on the body that are consistent with the protraction of abuse on this child in this act that indicate somebody who was enjoying himself, who took time to unnecessarily hurt this child. Beyond the sexual component of the insertion of the object, the whole thing was pleasure. And then there's the question of the stun gun question, which I think is very important, because you have the idea of somebody potentially subduing somebody to isolate them so you could have time with them because you're going to protract what you're doing. And so, Chris, I don't know what you mean by the elephant in the room. You could mean a few things, but I really love you to say. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in modern times today, the family has been screaming, let's get the DNA checked. Oh, okay, but that's not where I'm going yet. Okay, because there's difference of opinion in relationship to hairs and who's it belong to, blah 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 blah. I mean, they even went to China to find a white guy packing underwear. Okay, like you're going to find that guy in a Chinese factory packing underwear. The one white guy from North Korea. Go figure. I'm teasing. However, in modern times today, the technology to solve this case sits on that paintbrush.
Right.
The Bardot method.
Yes. Paging Dr. Bardot. Exactly.
Paging Francine Bardot. if you know anybody in Boulder, have them call Francine Bardol's lab and apply the Bardol method to this stick, because the suspect is turning this stick.
Yes.
Okay. Like this.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Guess what? There is more touch DNA on this stick than in the hair, than anything else that they have been, quote, trying to test. Okay. I know of a fact that Francine has removed touch DNA from rocks.
Once submerged in water, Chris.
Once immersed in water. From the back of shell casings. She could, if she had access to this stick, and if you know the Ramseys or you know anybody in Boulder, there's a new chief there, have them reach out to Francine Bardol. They know it. It's called the Bardol method. And it's an MVAC method where they can remove anything from that stick. That is the elephant in the living room in the JonBenet Ramsey case.
Right.
And,
well, Chris, Karen is saying in the audience that she wonders, it's an interesting point. She's saying she wonders if the DNA shows a stranger involved, then what are people in the audience going to say about the hypothesis that the family was involved? Will they be able to accept it?
Well, they've already said the DNA eliminated the family.
So then?
They haven't accepted it.
Right. It's an acceptance issue, I think, for some reason. I'm not really sure what that's about. But, I mean, it just seems, based on statistics, you can deduce who did this. But I think, Chris, for just a moment, I think we do have to talk about the victimology and why she was high risk.
Okay.
You know, because the whole idea is, if we are right about the kind of person who did this, he had to see her somewhere, to become fixated on her. And Chris, you know, the world of pageantry, the child pageantry, unfortunately has on its back this world of offenders that watch it for this reason, or interested in it for this reason. Would you agree with that it attracts, particularly in the online community, the dark web, so forth?
Well, and remember, 93 to 95, these chat rooms were just getting started. I mean, these guys were removing themselves from the street. So yeah, 100%.
Right. And then, you know, it's not meant to sound like a victim blaming or family blaming thing or something. It has to do with the idea that once somebody is involved in pageantry, they are a public figure. They're out in the world. Anybody who becomes a public figure attracts, in the pool of people that are out there, some people that are odd or become fixated on them or whatever. It happens to everyone. I mean, Chris, you and I have put ourselves out there, and we know what happens when you put yourself out there. You draw attention. People know who you are. They feel, they develop a personal relationship with you. They become interested in you. They, you know, and what you have to picture is somebody who is watching this child and starts to fixate in a fantasy world about doing certain things with them and feeling a connection to them. And then you have to picture somehow figuring out where the child lives, because it's not like you're walking around on the street with, you know, X-ray vision and you can see that there's a child in this house opportunistically. It's about that you've examined a house and looked at the points of vulnerability and then went into the house and did what you did. Now, Chris, wouldn't you say this person figured out where there was a vulnerability in the house and got in? Do you agree with the Smith hypothesis about the point of entry?
I think he was on to something about how the offender could have gotten into the house. Okay. Remember that the cops, the police were on to something in relationship to what they believed. Okay. And I just saw that note that was just put up there for a moment. Okay. And here's what they believed. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They went to the note immediately. They went to because the mom had called 911 and said, hey, you know, my daughter's been kidnapped and there's a note. So they got tunnel vision. They got tunnel vision, 100 police, 100%. And let me show you how unprepared they were. Okay, for a situation like this. I highlighted here. This is our whatever her name is, Kooky Eyes Arden's report. This is how unprepared she was. She went to the Boulder Police Department and obtained a handheld tape recorder as well as my notebook. If you're an on-call detective with a pager and a car, shouldn't you have these items in your vehicle so that you go to the scene? Okay. First red herring from me. She then meets with another detective at the police department, and then they respond to the location together. And then she meets with this officer, Vitek, and he informed me that he had the ransom note, which had been left by the reported kidnappers. Okay. Now, this is a juvenile detective, and I don't know who this other guy was, but they didn't have a homicide division or a unit. They didn't have a crimes of violence. Okay. She got called out because she handles juveniles. Okay. And what does she do? Hey, you know that note you've got? Yeah. Go make 3 copies, i.e., maybe destroy something when you put it into the copy machine. Okay. This is Detective Clouseau. Okay. That's who this is. Okay. Detective Clouseau here says, oh, by the way, okay, he does this and he comes back. She takes a copy. She gives another copy to the other guy, and she starts reviewing the contents of the note. She is already on a single track. She is not going to focus on the elephant in the living room. She's going to focus on the note. It's all about the note. I know it's about the note, quote unquote. Okay, Clouseau, you don't even go to the scene. She goes behind a shopping center before going to the scene to meet with other officers that had responded. And guess what? These other officers tell her, it doesn't look odd to us, other than the fact that the kid's missing. It could be a problem. Okay. It may be a real kidnapping. But Clouseau had her way, because when they got to the house, they didn't notice any signs of forced entry. Here's what you do when you get to the house. What rooms have been searched? Oh, the whole house. Okay, are you sure? Yeah, let's search it again. Every room, check them. You got all the family in here. You got mom over there by herself. You've got dad walking around checking the mail. You know, you've got this whole craziness going on, trying to hook up the phone, you know, with the tape recorder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Here's a hint. Okay. The child was taken out of the room, out of the house, potentially at that moment in their minds. Okay. Well, how about searching the house? Again, detective, that's your job. You're the detective. Detect. Get out there and look around. See what's happening. Okay? Because this is the elephant in the living room. It's sitting there. It was laying there. She was almost in full rigor. She had lividity setting in. That means she'd been dead for hours, probably while they were there. Meaning she'd been there all that time, the whole time. The whole time. And then she turns around to the world and tells the world, well, you know what? I did everything just right. No, you didn't. You did not. There are huge problems with this. Huge problems with this. Just from the get-go. And I'm going to get into this on another show. I'm going to go over this report inch by inch. And, because they're missing what you're talking about, Gary, what John Douglas talked about when he went into the house. He said, wait a minute, you've got a suspect using a torture device for sexual gratification. Okay, we'll deal with the note later. Let's deal, with the largest problem in the house. And the largest problem in the house is a deceased girl with this item wrapped around her neck. That's the problem.
And vaginal injury. I mean, if that's
they didn't even know at that point, right?
Right. But it's very, very important to point that out. I mean, that reveals what this was about. I mean, that this was because that wouldn't be necessary to create a staged intruder thing. You could have shot the child and made it look like a person broke in and wanted to quickly. In other words, if a person's going to hold somebody for ransom or something like that, there's no need to torture the person unless you're going to like photograph it and send the torture images to the family and say, this is what I'm going to do if you don't pay the money, that kind of thing. It's not necessary to torture the person to death if it has no practical purpose. It reveals that the purpose was clearly part of the fantasy life of the offender. And I don't know how clear we could make it that once you accept that probable reality, it's extremely difficult to view the family as involved. It becomes, you have to then start thinking outside the box. And then there are things that are consistent with the point I was making about having some familiarity, like, for example, the specificity regarding the bonus amount that the father received, which is sort of hinted at in the ransom note. There are things that suggest something like, having inside information, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're a member of the family. It just suggests somebody who's really watching you or really paying attention. And I think we have to posit somebody who is watching and examining and looking for vulnerabilities and experiences himself as having a special connection with the person that's being targeted in that fantasy life. Wouldn't you say, Chris?
Yes. And now let's
surveillance.
Right. Yeah. Let's reverse, right? Because remember, she's found like 4.5, 5 hours after the cops have been in the house. Okay. Let's imagine, though, let's just pretend you find her and she's like this. She's downstairs, she's in the room, and this is what you find. The cops find her. How much attention to the note takes place if it was reversed? 0 initially. The homicide investigator, experienced homicide investigator, would say, package the note and let's figure out that later. This is the elephant in the living room here. The victim, this is where you start with the victim. And what's ironic in this particular case is the victim is carried up the stairs by the father in full rigor with the friend ahead of the father running up the stairs saying, call an ambulance, call 911. Now, guess what? The cops are sitting there. Even that friend is in shock. He's telling them to call 911. Okay. She doesn't even have a police radio with her. Clouseau. Okay. She starts looking around for cell phones to try to make phone calls out to and she calls, the sheriff's department, And back then, cell phones went to whoever the closest agency was, and they're like, "What? Where are you? Who?" And so then they have to transfer her back over to her PD. Okay. And she's worried about John Ramsey attacking her as if he's the crazed killer. Okay. Well, this is, I got to call it the way I see it, Gary. You know me. Okay. That this is the whole reason the Cold Case Foundation exists. Because we look at stuff like this all day and go, that's a problem. Yeah, that's a problem. Because if you were to just have a paradigm shift just for a quick second and say the officers would have opened that door and discovered her, which I know French, who's a good guy, I've read his reports, he is sick to this day that he didn't open the latch and look in and find her in that room. Okay. Now, that's a mistake, but at least he admits it. And he put it in his report. Okay. But had he found her, the whole pretense of, okay, why would the parents do this? All of that changed because that takes out the narrative of what the officer forgets to tell the world. Mr. Ramsey, yeah, go search your house. She's real good at telling the world, yeah, I thought it was weird that he went right to the basement. Well, guess what? That was her job. She should have got off the couch and hustled down to every single room like she did to go upstairs to JonBenet's room. Okay. And then they tape off the door. Who does that? Oh, I know. Inexperienced detectives. Because you're adding something to the crime scene. The room is the crime scene. The whole house is the crime scene. They don't even put yellow tape outside until 8 p.m. that night.
Now, Chris, one day as a fun exercise, if you ever get a hold of Vernon Gayberth's book on homicide investigation and walk through it.
I've got it right behind me.
Yeah. Oh, good. Every single thing is not done according to what he would consider like perfect protocol. Like it's like you could walk through it and just be like, wrong. Like, because the guy had 800 homicide investigations under his belt. You know what I'm saying? So like for him, it's like there are things that would make you go, what are you doing? And it's, but I think it speaks to experience. I mean, rather than to, and I can't cast dispersion on somebody's where I would simply say it just seems to be an experience thing. But like, for example, if you put that image back up of that, the depiction, the first thing that would jump out at me if I looked at this was, if you're trying to make it look like money and robbery was the purpose for this, like with the ransom note, why wouldn't you take the child's bracelet and cross? Why wouldn't you take anything of value off of the body? You see what I'm saying?
Why would you use a garrote?
And why would you use a garrote? But I'm saying if robbery is the motive, anything that isn't nailed down that could be sold that has value. I mean, it looks like it was probably a gold bracelet and cross. Why would you leave them? There are little things like that, that you and I always say have a Columbo-like quality to them that would bother you. You would sit there and you'd say, it doesn't make sense that if you're going in there and you're financially motivated to not do that. Clearly, what probably happened was that it was a sexually motivated person, and if there was any staging, it was of that person making it look like a ransom situation because they had already killed the kid. It's that kind of, it's not the parents staging it because they want to explain, how their child died. It's probably more like an SO that is staging the situation and weirdly staging it. Because Chris, if you were trying to, make it look like the kid was killed because of a failed ransom situation, you wouldn't garrote them. You would shoot them, or do something that was expeditious and get out of Dodge. You would do it with a professionalism almost. You would go in there with everything in advance, and you would rapidly do it. And that none of it makes sense. So I think you'd agree, Chris, is that everything just points to a kind of inexperienced guy when it comes to sophisticated crime, but very experienced when it comes to SO, committing SA over and over again, and who probably saw this kid out in the world somewhere. And I think that's where the victimology comes in. It's not like the child wasn't visible to the world. Somebody probably saw her out there somewhere and got fixated on her, and figured out where she lived. And that's what's so horrifying about it. I mean,
so one of the things I'm gonna put this picture up real quick because it's on the internet, it's everywhere. But to give everybody a heads up, okay, this is the JonBenet. I've cropped it down. Okay, now going back to this weapon. That weapon is tightened. Okay. And it's like, I think it's like 15 inches, the length. Okay. But it's utilized so problematically, I'll call it. It is for the fantasy of the offender. It is not for the child. Right. It's not to kill the child.
Right.
Okay. It is to prolong the event.
Yes.
Okay.
And
so
the fantasy.
And the fantasy. Yeah. Everything is this process going through here. Okay. One of the most interesting things that I have always questioned myself, and the reason we know she's alive, again, I'm just going to do this real fast. Here's the autopsy report. And in the autopsy report, it's clear that there is petechiae hemorrhaging right here. Less than 1 millimeter petechiae hemorrhaging located on the cognitive surfaces. Okay, meaning the surfaces of the eye, and underneath here, within side of the eye, the blood vessels are breaking, which is very consistent with being alive and being strangled. Okay, so that said, also, when I talked to Lou, he told me a long time ago, there was a mark on her side and on her face. Okay. And on her face, and on the mark on the side, his theory at the time was that some type of taser device was utilized. Okay. He felt that was a strong possibility, but he was not 100% locked in. Okay. And this mark up here, though, okay, I asked him a little bit more about it, and then later I saw the photograph, and this was the photograph that I saw. Okay. And I've cropped it down. It's all over the internet now, but back when I was asked to take a look, that mark right there, that brown mark in the back. Okay. To me, that is a cigarette burn. Why do I say that? I want to show you these photographs of what a cigarette burn and the stages look like. If we look over here at E, up here in the top here, they're circular in nature like this. Okay, they're very consistent, and when they're pressed down, you can see these circles here will eventually, remember, she's been dead for quite some time when these photos are taken. So they would have been in the burn marks would have been very consistent if she was still alive like this. And then I asked myself, okay, well, where, if anything, is a contact point? And later on, after her death, there was this girl, 12 to 14, I believe, in September, who went to her dance class. They were in the same dance class. The investigators, they foo-fooed this. This little girl, an intruder had broken in within 2 miles of JonBenet's house, had SA'd her completely, and they found a whole series of cigarette butts, and they were Camel Blues, outside of her house, as if the suspect had been waiting. The father has, for years, been saying, look, I believe my daughter and JonBenet, who went to the same dance class, okay, who went to the same dance class, okay, may have been targeted. We would call that a contact point in our business. And a lot of folks have made, a lot about, the stun gun theory. Well, here are the pictures of an actual stun gun utilized on the human skin, not a pig, which Lou did. Those are the top marks are JB, and the 4, like a dice, are somebody that had done a comparative analysis. Those are pretty close.
I haven't thought about this, Chris, that has bothered me about the stun gun hypothesis. There are offenders that will utilize something like a bludgeon to the head, strangulation, or to make someone pass out, or a stun gun to get a person from one place to another to play out a fantasy with them when they wake up, right? Like Bundy, who would strike you over the head, but what we call a blitz style attack, where you engage the person in conversation and then take an object and do that to them. For example, it's thought that Rex Heuermann might have used something like that with a worker, a sex worker, to then get them to the workshop, kind of thing that might have been set up to, or at least that's suspected by some people. Well, the problem with this is, think of it like this. If you're a sadistic person and you want to play out cruelty to a person, it doesn't make sense to knock them out. You'd want them awake. You're not a passive person who's going to want to be doing what you're doing on a person who's asleep. The only reason for stun gunning the person would be to get them from one place to a private home or a private alley or a place where you're going to do what you're going to do to them. This is a situation where you're already in the house. You'd want to subdue them, but you would need them awake. You would need them alert for the pleasure. So that's why I think it makes more sense that it's cigarettes, that you're burning the child as part of the torture, not to knock them out. There are other offenders that love for the person to be knocked out because what they're interested in doing is using the victim like a puppet or a marionette and playing things out on a sleeping person or a subdued person where they have total control. This person's exhilaration comes from looking into the face of the person and seeing and smelling their fear and their pain, and that gives them a sense of excitement. The average person cannot fathom that because it's so horrifying. What kind of offender, by the way, gets aroused by such things? Well, first of all, a lot of those people were once victims of child abuse themselves, so that there's a feeling of power and now I'm turning it on you, right? And some of them are people who have paraphilic disorders where they get excited about that kind of thing. There are deeply disturbing things I will not bring up here about studies that have been done of what's going on in the brain and the way people like that perceive the reactions of their victims and what it does to their mind and all that. But I think that, Chris, you would agree that it makes more sense to be burning a victim if you're a sexually sadistic person. I mean, I think that's where you're going with this, right? The stun gun doesn't make sense. What would be the use for this kind of offender of a person who's stun gunned, unless they woke up a little while later? How much time does it take, Chris, to come out of being stunned with a stun gun?
Oh man, it's it's an experience, let me tell you. But you come out of it within 30, 40 seconds, if that.
Right.
But it hurts. I mean, it's not
So
fun.
it could be, it's possible, it's plausible that if you were using a stun gun as part of torture, then you could be a sadist who uses one.
Yeah,
But from a practical perspective,
and I don't know what the 2 marks are on the back. Okay. But, you know, I've seen enough homicides that people have been, and kids, children who have been burnt by a cigarette. Okay. And used as an ashtray, for lack of a better term.
oh yeah,
And then when I saw that, I thought, man, I guess it could be an electrical burn, but it looks more consistent with a cigarette. And then I went back and I found out that the PD had recovered cigarette butts outside. Now this is at JonBenet's house. And I thought to myself, okay, maybe they were onto something here. And then when you take that and you correlate it with this case later, is the perpetrator, and that's the other the other thing I want to talk about here, Garrett, for the audience is this is not a one and done.
No. There's a failure of case linkage going on here, probably, where there are going to be cases all over. But Chris, wouldn't you say that part of the reason other cases might be dismissed would be that, let's say, a garrote wasn't used or whatever, but this could just be a person with a kind of inventiveness that uses whatever's around,
right,
to experience this kind of pleasure. And because the person appears to be so fantasy driven, the simple ingredient is a child victim, probably female, who's been isolated in some way, and that you're doing torturous things to until you experience arousal. But then there's inadequacy, so you use an object or some other thing to perpetrate the sexual component, which then, of course, raises the question, was there any semen? And if there isn't, again, that goes along with a person who's inadequate, you know, who isn't capable of that kind of, you know, completion of the act, but who certainly would have been aroused by it. As far as I know, there was no seminal evidence, right?
No, there was.
Right.
There was. She had been wiped in her private areas. Of course, they found some type of what they believe DNA materials. She had been moderately assayed, not completely with the human side, but more of, you know, the paintbrush was a theory. And that was the other thing, Gary, don't you think the third piece missing, he's got that in his pocket somewhere?
I think he'd keep it as a memento or a fantasy object to utilize for psychosexual purposes when alone.
Yeah.
Because that object, and now this is, I'm going to be very careful how I say this so we can be sensitive. It's a family program, right?
Yeah.
So you want to understand that for this kind of offender, that kind of object is an extension of the sexual organ,
right?
An extension of the self, and you would keep it as a kind of virile, in your mind, virile object, a memento, a thing that ties you to the intimacy that in your twisted mind occurred with this person that you feel you have owned or objectified in some way. So you keep it like a kind of weird symbolic trophy of the offense. And, you know, you might hide it and be the one who knows where it is when no one else does. You might keep it somewhere, but you have to picture the outrageous process. Just like, Chris, if you or I, you know, had a big day in our lives, the day of getting married, the day of having a child, the day of winning a major prize, the day of a promotion, we might keep things like in a scrapbook or something, right? Imagine how pathetic, how awful being a person that for you, the memento of the day you became great in your mind, that you achieved something in your mind, is the retention of a little piece of a paintbrush that was used to kill a child through asphyxiation and to vaginally assault them. And then you really start to understand how awful what we're dealing with is here and how fantasy oriented this is. That's why, Chris, that I think it's very clever that you're pointing out a nearby offense that might have been, because what's the probability that you have two people who probably are committing a lot of these offenses within a few miles. Well, if I remember correctly from my reading, there were 38 RSOs in the area. That's not a lot, given the area. And I hope they were all thoroughly questioned. But wasn't one of the offenders looked at, Chris, even by Lou Smith, the guy that had kept coming up recently as a suspect, Gary Oliva?
Yeah.
Was he one of the offenders that they looked at? Was he an RSO?
Well,
In the area?
and he had said, remember, he was writing notes. And then Carr, you know, and but Olivia, I mean, we just ran across him recently, didn't we?
Yeah. I heard he got out of jail in 2024. Is that true?
Would you say it again?
I heard that Olivia got out of jail in 2024. Is that true?
Did he get out?
That's what I heard. That I mean, I read it somewhere recently. That, but I think it's important to understand, like, this is not a one and done, as you said. No way, no how. Why do we know that? Because the whole idea is, if you're committing a fantasy-based offense, you have a quality of wanting to perfect the fantasy. So you have to do it over and over and over again. But you also need to keep upping the ante, upping the excitement, upping the thrill, upping the, there's like a fuel component. I would also posit a person, Chris, that would be very active looking at CP. I cannot even imagine if you could see the computer, for example, of such a person, or the dark web activity. You and I both know what this guy must have been looking at. And unfortunately, as you can attest better than anybody, there's no shortage of it in that world. But I think very fantasy-oriented person would have done something to play it out over and over again, drawn it, imagined it, kept trophies, looked at CP, sometimes cartoon format imagery, because there's like ways to use cartoons to get around the law, as I understand it. Gayberth talks about that in his writing.
They scramble. Right. Nowadays with AI, they scramble the kids' pictures, and then they put them through programs that have to unscramble it. So and they trade. They're still trading. I have a really good video. I don't have it set up tonight, but I'll play it. San Jose PD back in the day did an undercover operation where I have the FBI video of the sting operation where they wanted to, get a child and then make them, a movie, a snuff movie. And it's really just, you just go, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But this is the stuff that was going on, back in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, when a lot of this was starting to get into the internet and stuff. And today, I mean, the fuel here is unbelievable for these individuals. I mean,
Chris, I was just writing for the new book I'm working on. I was writing about this new technology that's being advertised on some adult lewd websites. And the technology is that if you have a photograph of anyone, an ex-girlfriend, an ex-wife, a person that you found on social media, whatever, AI can superimpose the face of that individual over pornography.
Yeah.
So that you can imagine yourself to be having an encounter with anyone. Now, you and I both know that as soon as such a technology exists, some person with a paraphilic disorder who's drawn to children is going to stick the face of a kid on there. And, that's the kind of thing you've got to understand is that you're dealing with these awful, awful, awful personalities, these awful people. And the idea that technologies like that exist, that the metaverse, another example, we've talked about that. This is fuel. And this guy, whoever did this, would have been swimming in a world of fantasy and fuel and looking at this child in that way and fixating and imagining and all of that. And I think we cannot pretend that that kind of offender doesn't exist and isn't. And the worst part is, as Anna Salter tells us, is we all think it's a guy with a certain look that behaves in a certain way. But more often than not, it's the really nice guy that we know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. It's the really nice guy that we know. It's not the guy that looks like a weirdo off the. But whoever did this one, though, I think would not have been particularly socially apt and would have fallen into that category of standing out as weird, because you get clues of that from. He also would have been a kind of misanthropic person who wouldn't be very nice to people, because we have to picture a sadistic kind of a character, right?
Yeah.
And also a liar.
Yeah,
Based
keep talking because I'm
right.
going to answer Gummy Bear's question.
Oh, I'm very fond of Gummy Bears. Often has good questions. I know Gummy Bear has asked us many good questions, Chris, over time, and often has very kind things to say about the show. But I think that it's important to understand that this also would have been a nasty character, a guy with a little bit of a temper, a little paranoid, a little misanthropic person, a person who would have compensated for terrible inadequacy by overpowering people or kind of plowing through them when they talk, or that kind of thing. And the fantasy life would have been, I think, very fueled by outrageous CP for sure. Chris, haven't you looked through phones and computers of offenders of this type?
Yeah, too much.
Yes, and the things you see never leave you.
The things that these people are capable of getting into in today's environments, it's crazy. And to answer your question, Gummy Bears, and thank you for the question. They don't say it's from seminal fluid. They say a fluid was wiped. It appeared, and this was all during the autopsy, it appeared a fluid was wiped, but they didn't have any, just to say that the suspect stood there. And again, and, had whatever, I don't want to get violated by YouTube. So the fact that, but the fact that this individual, though, fixated this thing on her, and didn't, get the problem fixed for them, that just created more problems for the perpetrator when they were leaving. Okay, they might that the act of killing may have satisfied them, even if it was an accident. The fact that it happened.
Right.
And Gary, in your book, in your opinion, where does this individual, or where should we look for this type of personality who would utilize this type of device?
Well, first of all, let me just say something quickly that's going to, I want to get out of the way in order to answer that question. But I think, the jury is out on what's going on in the brains and personalities of the kind of people who do this. But one of the things that I think is really necessary to understand, to grasp this kind of person, is you have to imagine a totally different way of emotionally reacting to things that most people would find upsetting, or that would make them want to go in and rescue a person or help them. So imagine, like, if you or I saw a person wounded on the side of the street, it would be our natural human inclination to want to jump out and help them, sometimes overriding our own self-protection mechanism, right, to do that. Now imagine a person who sees a person bleeding on the street and becomes aroused, excited by that. So picture, for example, when BTK, right, Dennis Rader, as a child would watch cartoons of Dudley Do-Right, where a damsel in distress is tied to the train track, right? He would find that sexually arousing.
Like an apex predator.
Like an apex predator, where that would literally arouse him, as opposed to being horrifying or evoking empathy. That's very important to comprehend, that weird kind of reversal of the normal human reaction, where all the cues that we would give to tell someone we need help, like screaming, wide eyes, gesturing, whatever, would be arousing to you, right? And and there are other offenders. Another example is there was a book years ago called The Collector, which is about a man who keeps a woman in a pit. It's like a butterfly collector, I think, and a lepidopterist, and he keeps a woman in a pit. Well, when Robert Berdella, the serial sexual sadist Robert Berdella, read that book, he found it arousing. Instead of being horrified by a horror story about somebody being kept down there, it excited him, it thrilled him, it fueled fantasy, it made him want to try it himself, right? So we want to bear that in mind when we're saying what kind of now, if you look at the new evil, once there's torture, the minimum score is category 18. 18 is for an individual who, for whatever reason, uses non-protracted torture, like asphyxiation, things like that, but it's not medieval style, keeping somebody for a few days and torturing them in every imaginable way, like in a medieval torture chamber. You would usually have like 18, which is where, for example, you would place BTK if you consider what he did kind of torture-like slow asphyxiation, things like that. If the individual is committing a more medieval style torture where there are many instruments, you've been isolated into a chamber, like David Parker Ray, the category would be 22. Unless there hasn't been any killing, then you could think about 21 as the category. 21 would be the category if you do that in the context of psychosis. Personally, I think this is a category 18 offender. And people who are in category 18 tend to have, even with regard to killing, outrageous numbers of victims. Outrageous numbers of victims. People in that category where you're committing serial sexual homicide or serial sexual offenses, if you're committing serial sexual homicide, the average number of victims in my own work and my own findings is 12, which is what I would posit for, even like, for example, Rex Heuermann. I would think Rex Heuermann would have at least 12 victims if he's the kind of offender that he's accused of being, right? Minimum in my guess, based on experience. But when it comes to just the offenses against children where there's no murder, expect astronomical numbers with this kind of offender. Possibly photographing them, following them and touching them, luring them, using little tricks to kind of make contact with them physically. I would say, Chris, for example, to expect that in the Stefan Stearns case. If Stefan Stearns is guilty and they start going into his background, do you not agree that the notion that Madeline would be the only victim would make no sense based on your own experience with child offenses?
No, if they wouldn't have corralled him, the fact that he had 35,000 photographs on just his phone, right,
makes no sense.
Can you imagine what's on his hard drives?
I don't even want, or on Rex Heuermann's.
And can I answer this question real fast, Gary?
Yes, please.
For LMO, there wouldn't have been all internet crap back when she was killed. Unfortunately, there was. The first photograph, I believe, that was transferred over the internet was 1993, and it became very efficient in 1995. So by then, pedophiles were using the internet like a candy store. But finish your thought, Gary.
Well, the other thing I think we have to talk about is, why was she killed the day she was killed?
That's another great point.
We have to talk about that, because for offenders, you want to pay attention to the when. What activates them on that day? For example, was it a day when a lot of people would be getting together and there was a kind of envy of the love and the happiness they were experiencing? Was it a practical consideration, like they'll just be busy, right? I think she was found the day after Christmas, right? The day, the 26th, she died?
No, the 25th, Christmas Day.
Was it?
They were at a Christmas party on the 24th.
But I want to see the actual day that they found her, because if it's Christmas Day, it's extremely important. I mean, there can be no question that has a meaning. Yeah, because they have her date of death as the 26th. But that confuses me. I'd like to clarify that, to be honest. But I think we'd agree it has a meaning. Like, for example, speaking of people in pits, one of the points I make in the New Evil is talking about Gary Heidnick, who kept women in the pit in the basement in Philadelphia, intellectually disabled women, people like that, that he could take full advantage of. He was keeping them there to sire a line of children loyal to him, that kind of thing. And
Christmas Day discovered Christmas or 26th morning.
Found on the 26th, but killed on the 26th. That's profoundly important.
Well, they believe that. Because they went to the party. But go ahead.
That's important. So in the Heidnik case, one of the things I pointed out was that if you lay out when he abducted these women and people that he felt the need to have a complete control over, the dates were highly significant. They were things like they surrounded holidays. They had to do with times when people would be getting together and he would feel especially lonely, right? So that would heighten for somebody like that a greater need to control relationships and keep people from abandoning you and keep people around you, what he did by finding people that were helpless and keeping them in a pit. Well, I'm always very suspicious of dates. So why Christmas? Why would you pick Christmas? Does it add to the cruelty? Is it about lonesomeness? Is there a spiritual significance to the date in the mind of the offender related to the what would activate a person like that? And I think it's something to think about. I really do. Don't you?
Yes, because that I agree with you. That's got to be a significance inside of the
yes,
the offender's mind, and the fact that are they adding, to your point, are they adding more pain and suffering to those survivors around her? And and then this question here is, thanks for the show. Do you think blunt force injury occurred because the offender rage, because she passed away before he finished with the fantasy? That is a great question, because the autopsy reports kind of indicate that time of death was almost simultaneously in line with the asphyxiation and the blunt force trauma. It could have been part of his fantasy. We just won't know, but you can bet this type of offender that they never, this type of apex offender like this, what Gary's talking about, the 18 model here, we'll call him the 18. Okay. Yeah. This type of offender, first of all, let's, in my mind, and I've had this discussion 100 times with homicide detectives, who are convinced that the mom, is the perpetrator. And then I'm like, guys, please, let's go back. And I always take them in my classes, take them back to the elephant in the living room. And Tom Green, if you're listening out there, you please verify this for everybody. He's been my friend for 20 plus years, and he was in a class of mine 20 years ago where I brought this very thing up. And I said to him, look, this is a problem. And you've got to do you really believe that, it's a staging? No, come on. You don't stage by wrapping the thing so deep into the victim's neck, okay, that it becomes part of the victim's neck almost. I mean, I've seen, cords around people's necks where their heads are almost taken off. And had this suspect kept on going here, he would have been pretty close, kept on going. But that said, in this situation, to your point, Gary, why is, number one, a 9-year-old's not going to do this. We take him out of the, leave that poor kid alone.
I don't think he'd have the physical strength to do it.
No, just take him off the plate, everybody, please. Leave that kid alone. Who's a man now. We can analyze what he looks like, how he blinks, how he, his mouth moves and everything. Just leave him alone. He did not tie this around his sister's neck. End of story. It was somebody much more sophisticated than that. Somebody sophisticated to move his sister into a wine cellar room, to wrap his sister, okay, to put a piece of tape over her mouth, to utilize this device, okay, And by the way, if you're just joining us, this is the elephant in the living room. That stick. If you know anybody at Boulder PD, or if you know the Ramsey family, have them send this stick to Francine Bardot. And you can get hold of her through the Cold Case Foundation. Or reach out to me. I'll connect you. But she can pull touch DNA off of this stick, because what we're forgetting, and this is what I've been saying for quite some time, is that suspect is using this device and tightening it. And that means his hands are all over it. Right? It means their hands are all over it. Whoever it is, their hands are on it. Okay. And you don't go to Cub Scout camp and learn how to make a garrote. I don't care what anybody says. Okay. It doesn't happen. I forgot where I was going here, Gary, but keep me honest. Oh, here's the other knots. Okay, great. But the suspect had to take their time to manufacture this thing.
I think you were getting at that if you were going to stage, it wouldn't make sense to take the time to add this extra element, and that it's improbable that a parent in staging a crime or covering up for a child, or whatever these hypotheses are people have, covering up for the brother and all these other ideas. I mean, why would you take the time to insert a portion of a paint handle and to asphyxiate the child through torture? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Did you see, Chris, the photograph I sent you during the program of the mother with the child? I sent it in private chat.
I haven't pulled it up here.
Okay, because I feel that if you look at it, you can see right away that the loving relationship between the mother and the child. I mean, this doesn't look like a kid who's afraid of her mother because she's being.
Yeah, is there more potential that they did? They did want to end her, or they didn't? What was the result of the other girl that was assaulted? How did it end? Great question, Kylie, excuse me. So the other case after JonBenet, the father said, hey, my daughter, and the circumstances around that one are, her name was, they call her Amy, but the circumstances were the intruder came into the house. Father was away on business. Mother was home by herself. She went to the same dance studio as JonBenet. Now, what are the odds of that? Number one.
Right.
So
agreed. That's odd.
Yeah. One of the things that we always talk about here on the show is the victim risk continuum.
Right.
Okay. Environment, situation, circumstance, low, medium, high. If you're new to our channel, this is what they call the victim risk continuum. Okay. Low, medium, high, environment, situation, circumstance. What's the circumstance? A child sleeping in her bed. Okay. What's the environment? In her house. Okay. What's the situation? She's gone. A la Elizabeth Smart. Okay. Is that a low, medium, or high risk activity to sleep in your bed? Low. Is it a low, medium, high risk activity to sleep in your own house? Low. Okay. Is it circumstantially, that would tell us down here that there's a high probability that the offender, okay, has access to the victim and is known and or cross paths with the victim. Yes. It's not like a lady of the evening working at 4:00 in the morning downtown, Manhattan. Okay. That's a high risk. In this case, JonBenet is low. Okay. So just like in Elizabherth Smart's case, her sister, who was the witness, goes, man, in like 4 months or whatever the time frame was, I forget now, Then all of a sudden she has an aha moment and goes, ah, I remember it was that guy, it was the handyman guy that had access to the house. And lo and behold. So now that tells us, okay, that the perpetrator either A, crossed paths with the victim in a common area, like a dance studio, or B, cross paths with the victim in the house in a previous occasion. Okay, those would be your two type of scenarios. Well, so now we go into this idea that says, okay, when Amy's case went down in September, I believe, let me pull it up again.
While you're pulling it up, Chris, I was listening to what you said. Just I needed a quick second. But just to clarify, I think what would increase the risk to her was the public exposure and being in the pageantry world, because she's then in public display. She becomes a public figure.
That puts her at a medium,
Right?
but not in her house.
No, but I think that, in other words, it isn't as low risk as somebody who's simply going to school, going to,
No, but she would be a medium risk if she was in public and something had happened to her.
Right. That's what I'm getting. Right.
Yeah.
But we agree that targeting her in the home was extremely risky.
Correct.
Particularly on a holiday. And
well, the offender's risk is higher than the victim's.
Yes, definitely.
The
Which
offender
tells me something about their judgment and all of that, right? I mean, because alongside looking at victimology, I think looking at the risk level is very important.
Okay, and that's why I want to jump forward to this guy in September.
Right.
Okay, 9 months later, a girl who danced in her class, JonBenet's class, all of a sudden, her father's out of town, her mother's home with her, her mother puts her down to bed, her mother goes to bed, and an intruder comes into the house. They don't even know how he got in. He assaults her. He SA'd her completely. The mother hears something in the room, yells back, what's going on? Are you okay? And goes into the room, grabs some mace from her nightstand, runs into her daughter's bedroom, and catches the suspect in the room, who's dressed all like a ninja, black, et cetera, et cetera. She maces him, and he jumps out the window from a second story window.
Wow.
Okay. If you take the fact sheet here, we kind of overlay, they're pretty close. Okay. They went to the same dance school. She was taken from an upstairs bedroom. This girl was assaulted in an upstairs bedroom. Mom was home. Mom and dad were both home in JonBenet's house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You just go down the list. Okay. Now, are they 100%? No. Okay. Are they close? Close enough for me as an investigator to say, what evidence do we have on Amy's case? And can we correlate this evidence? Can we take this evidence? Okay. And what do? They find a ton of cigarette butts, Camel Blues, in the alley. Okay. And so I want to think that they were thinking about it. And here is why I want to say that. In this report, this is Ardent's report. She asked the question. John said the man was fired because he lied on his application, not because he was a smoker. She had asked, the male employee was asked this question. The male employee stated that he was not a smoker. Okay. Now, somebody was thinking about this problem. And what I want to know is, did they collect cigarette butts? That's what I wanted to know. And the answer is yes. If you go down on the search warrant, this is the inventory sheet from the Ramsey house, and we get down here, cigarette butts, like the 5th item down. Leaves and a bag. So these cigarette butts were found outside of the house. 9 months later, cigarette butts would be found outside of the house in Amy's case. Now, I'm not a rocket scientist, but Boulder, if you have these cigarette butts from both cases, get them checked, please. Send them out for DNA analysis. That may be another DNA problem, could be resolved, and at least catch the guy that assaulted the other girl. Now, that tells me a lot about the suspect in September. And it tells me a lot about what was going on in that town. If this guy was so bold to hot prowl a young girl into the house. Okay.
But there was no torture of that victim, right?
Well, she didn't get a chance. He didn't get a chance.
Well, that's what I think would make a lot of people unlink them. But it's entirely possible it was an interrupted effort.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
This is for you, Gary.
Type of the others, ransom note on mom's notepad, dad's bonus amount mentioned there, and entry. Well, I think it's suggestive of a person who committed the offense, tried to make it look like some intruder came in to commit it, which explains using a pad that was right there in the house to, with a big brilliant idea you have is to stage, that there's going to be a ransom situation. To throw everybody off the track, in a kind of weird, unsophisticated way. And I think there's a little bit of a myth about the father's bonus. A lot of people think like the amount was exact, they knew his exact bonus. It was close to, but not exactly the same. It was off by, by 3 digits, the amount. But if we take it that he was familiar with the bonus, that simply is consistent with somebody that could have been rummaging through garbage or some other thing that suggests having cased the joint a little bit for a while. I mean, Chris, don't you think that if that's not a coincidence, it's consistent with somebody who had some knowledge of the inner workings of the house? It doesn't point to a family member. It just means, like a surveillance situation. It's kind of like the same thing that came up with Kohberger, right? When we were talking about Kohberger and people, the first thing they say is, he wasn't charged with stalking. So how could you say that he was casing the place or paying it? Well, stalking has a specific legal definition, but how else would you have watched the victim or picked the victim or followed the victim? How would you get the victim if you didn't see them somewhere and then watch them and know their habits and figure out how to get in? You may not add that to the charges, but there's no logical way around it unless you just walked down the street and said, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, picked the house, went into the house and targeted who was living in it. There is some degree of watching and casing, right? And so don't you think, Chris, that suggests somebody, this fantasy life, so forth, with control needs and all that, who's looking and knows a little bit about what's going on? That's all it means. I don't find that difficult to reconcile with what we're saying at all. And certainly John Douglas didn't.
Remember Dodd when
another one you talked to, you had the nightmarish joy of talking to, right?
Wesley tells me that he turned the TV on because he had the boy back at his house. Mm-hmm. And the mayor and the sheriff were on a press conference telling everybody, and you probably remember this story, part of what he told everybody. But Dodd goes, yeah, I'm watching this guy, and the sheriff says, yeah, we've got a whole focus search over here, and we're doing this and that and that. For the audience, so what Dodd ended up doing, he packs the kid up in a car and he drives him to the opposite side of town, goes in public, plain view, for the part of the thrill, and he takes him to McDonald's.
Yep.
And he buys them a Happy Meal. And meanwhile, the sheriff's on the news with the mayor telling the world, you see, and that's one of the things that I think people don't quite understand. It's like, in their minds when they get into this, well, I don't think that's how it happened. I don't think the two cases are related. Okay, well, the reason, you're probably not investigating these kind of cases is because you're not teachable. You have, you don't know, we don't know what these guys think until you sit down with them and
Right.
you're sitting across from them, right, Gary? And they look at you and they go, dude, you got it wrong. You go, okay, teach me. What do I want to know? Well,
Right.
You said I was over here when actually I was over here. You were close, but I was over here. Okay. And this is one of these things that, the public, this case took a life of its own on, and everybody got so focused on the note. They got so focused on, the family, the brother did it, the mom did it, the father did it, that they forgot that this is what did it. And now you think about the power of Netflix in today's world. It's been 30 years, and the power of this media has now brought this to the attention of the world again. When Lou Schmidt, reached out to many agencies across the country, we just happen to be one of them, and says, hey, I've got this device here. What do you guys think of this device? Whoa. Where was this? Oh, yeah, it was, and the rest is history, right? And then guys like us, me, would call guys like Gary and say, Gary, what's his number? I got to read what's his number. Help me understand that guy's number. And by the way, I've worked well over 500 North death cases. 300 of those were murder. Right? And the others were suicides, naturals, that kind of stuff. Okay. I still don't know.
Right.
And Vernon's written books that are sitting in the lobby back here. And he will tell you to this day, I guarantee it, every case is, God has always left a witness, or he's opened a door or closed a window. And as Vernon says in his book, we work for God. Okay?
Well, I'll tell you something. Vernon, who I consider the pinnacle of homicide investigation, right? The guy that taught the masters, right?
Yeah.
And one of the great crowning achievements of my career is that if you go to Vernon's website and you look at his suggested research materials, the new evil is there.
Yeah.
Vernon suggests that detectives and experts everywhere should read it to understand the motives of these kind of offenders and how to distinguish in a sophisticated way. And I can't tell you how proud that makes me, because Vernon is a hero of mine. And, so it's like, what I'm trying to tell you is that the experts they need experts. Experts go to experts. And, the idea is when you want to look at who experts know what they're talking about, and that's why it meant a lot to me. Because to me, that implies someone looking at the work and saying, you've seen this stuff because you get it. You get it. And that's why, Chris, it's one of the reasons I always enjoy coming on your show, is because I feel like I'm with people who know this stuff, who really get it, who've been there. It's not pseudo experience. Because everyone who's had encounters with offenders, they come to these same ways of thinking about these guys. That's what you're going to start to understand. That's why I don't know any experts who say to me, nah, the parents put that garrote. Not one.
I've yet to find one.
Conclusion. It doesn't, you see what I'm saying? It doesn't, because we know these people.
Yeah, it makes absolutely.
Right.
Go ahead.
No, I'm saying we know these people.
You know, well, everybody was focused on the knot, or excuse me, on the again, the node. Okay. Even in the series, there were many experts that looked at that note and said she didn't write it. But you get one or two. I mean, just look what's going to happen in Koberger's case.
Mm.
No, that's not his phone. Okay, here's a check. No problem. Okay. And they got so tied up. But when they brought in John Douglas, he, the father, him and Ann, John goes in and goes, parents didn't do this. And they ridiculed him. And he was like, hey, good luck. Happy. And today, they've written books. The two detectives have written books. Okay. I mean, various people have written books. Okay. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm going to tell you that when Officer Clouseau, Detective Clouseau, puts in her report, I was standing in the hallway facing the door to the basement when I saw John Ramsey coming up the final 3 or 4 stairs. John was carrying a young girl in his arms. The young girl had long blonde hair. John Ramsey was carrying the young girl in front of him, using both of his arms to hold her around her waist area. The young girl's head was above John Ramsey's head while he was carrying her. From a distance of approximately 3 feet, as John was walking up the stairs, I was able to make the following observation to this young girl. First of all, that's improper English. Okay. I was, should have said about this young girl. Both of her arms were raised above her head and were motionless. She's describing the child. And she then says, I told John to place the young girl's body on the rug just inside the front doorway. John did as he was instructed. The young girl was JonBenet. What is she writing, a novel? JonBenet appeared to have been dead for a period of time. Okay. So she's so good and she's so amazing as a detective. I know that this guy killed his daughter. You know how I know? Well, tell us, Detective Clouseau, Crazy Eyes. After John Ramsey left, I picked up JonBenet and carried her into the living room. So let me get this right, Sherlock. You tell him to put the baby down, who you know is dead, and they taught you in the police academy to pick her up and move her into another room? You should have been relieved of duty the moment the real detective got on the scene and said, you did what? Well, yeah, I transferred everything here that I had, and I saw that he had everything here and transferred everything to her. Well, I just figured you need more trace evidence. And so I figured I'll just pick her up and move her into another room. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that's called FUBARD. Fudged up beyond all recognition from the get-go. I wouldn't trust her judgment to say that John Ramsey is the killer when she doesn't even have good judgment to know that she violated every protocol that law enforcement teaches in an accredited police academy. How in the world did she feel that she thought it was a good idea to pick this dead child up and then later on critique the father bringing the child up the stairs? There's a mixed match in thought process here, from my opinion. And that is why she missed this. This is the elephant in the living room, folks. 100%. This case is solvable. With the proper desire and will to solve it, that family can get justice. JonBenet can get justice. And the perpetrator out there who's done this can be brought to justice. You have to start here.
And I would guarantee you, Chris, the solving of this case would actually be, unbeknownst to the people who would capture the offender, if he's still alive, would be solving countless cases, because this offender would have done this many times. Many times. There'd be closure once, if you got the guy to talk or admit that. Lots of cases.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And don't misunderstand me. 99.9% of law enforcement officers do not pick up dead bodies after recognizing they're dead.
Right.
They realize the chain of custody, the amount of problems that will occur post the moment that happens, which this case is a living nightmare from the very moment. And this is why I think the parents sat back for a moment and said, maybe we need an attorney, because they saw what we read and what we're reading. These are her own words. I told John Ramsey to go to Patsy, go in the other room. After John left, I picked up JonBenet. It's at the very bottom there.
Right.
And carried her into the living room.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody asked her why. Why did you do that? Because had they done that, it would have been in a report. Instead, she starts describing what the child's wearing.
Well,
it's a disaster. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, one procedural question that somebody in the audience asked, I think it's an intriguing question, is if we're so convinced that this offender would have committed other offenses, how come the DNA doesn't hit when you put it into a database? Why aren't there other? Now, is the idea that this is a person who isn't leaving semen, that kind of DNA? Is it that they're just very clever? Is it that it predates when these databases were created? You have any thought on that? Because it's an interesting question. Because this guy is out there. Could he be in jail? I mean, what do you think?
He's probably not in jail if the DNA marking or the DNA profile that they have that's in CODIS now, and it's checked probably every week. Okay, automatically the algorithm will check it automatically to everybody that comes in to the system. Okay. This guy is going to be one of these guys that is under the radar, kind of like Hurman. And then all of a sudden, boom, there are bodies that just start falling.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy will be that guy.
Right. The bodies had already been discovered, but no one linked them. It's that kind of thing. There are a lot of cases, I would posit, all over the place, and a certain probably number of miles from where this happened, where some SO did what they did and got off, got away with it. That is to say, when I say get away, and the idea is that one day somebody will realize that they were all the work of one person.
Yeah, actually, Dad did scream when he found her. It's in her report. Let me go over. I'll show you.
That's a good question for Francine also, Chris.
What's that part, Gary?
Well, that idea about, why wouldn't he have turned up I mean, who knows if this, if this guy's DNA is in databases or not, from a lot of these crimes that years ago, they didn't even collect stuff.
Yeah. Let's see here.
The family had no involvement. What a
Right,
pitiful thing to think about the mother going to her death, you know,
right
without,
here.
you know, ugh.
It says, I returned to the den approximately blah, blah, blah. Ran from the area. This is her running. The basement door to the den. I heard some type of shout or scream before I saw, and it says, I think it's going to say John. I saw grab the phone in the den. Oh no, that's going to be his friend. And dialed to 3 numbers, hang up the phone, then ran back towards the basement door, yelled for someone to call an ambulance. I followed to the basement door. To the basement was wide open. I was standing in the hallway facing the door of the basement when I saw John Ramsey coming up the final 3 stairs. So she heard somebody yelling. Okay. And the dad was pretty clear. He came up and he had his dead daughter in his arms, and he was holding her like this. And she was full rigor with her arms up in the air, and she had the thing tied. And what just kills me, okay, as he's walking by with her, the detective is describing what she looks like. Both of her arms were raised above her head and motionless. Her lips appeared to be blue, and her body appeared to have rigor. This is a dead child in this detective's mind. This is a homicide now. Okay. And the fact that she decides, to pick her up and move her again, it's like, really? Did you not learn anything in police work in the academy? And that just goes to show you from day one, she's been locked on to this whole scenario. And then she passes that scenario on to Thompson or to Thomas. And if you go start looking through the search warrants, she's the impetus for all of this. This is my observation, she says. These are my observations. But unfortunately, nobody's called her, really called her out on it in totality. All you have to do is read her reports. And you go, man, that's just, you don't bust into the operating room and push the surgeon aside who's doing heart surgery and say, let me take over. I know what I'm doing. And that's what they did. They sent the janitor, okay, to a heart surgery. And you make mistakes, and it takes 30 years to unwind them. And then in between all of that, those mistakes are perpetuated even more and more. So,
Chris, it's fascinating that I had read yesterday or something that the director of the Netflix documentary that we referenced publicly said that he's embarrassed about having once thought that the Ramseys were involved, and that having looked at Smith's work and having made the documentary, he concluded that it had nothing to do with them, and that there was a kind of giant kind of propaganda system where the press was being fed information, but that ultimately they probably didn't have anything to do with it, that the science pointed to that. And I hope that some people in the audience arrive at the same conclusion listening to us, that this is not our first rodeo. We're talking about these kind of offenders, and I just hope that some people's eyes open and they say, it's maybe easier and more comforting to think that things are as simple as somebody died in the house and it was their own family that did it. But we have to face the horrifying reality that what really happens sometimes is that there's a stranger out there that for his own amusement will do this over and over and over and over and over. And until we get over ourselves and accept that kind of person can operate with impunity for decades. decades.
Yeah, and this is an
Denial.
article in the Denver Post from back in the day.
Denial. Simply.
I was involved, guys.
Yeah.
In the very beginning, look at these names here. Went to Oceanside. That's my agency. Guess who they contacted? They contacted my boss, Mike Goldsmith, who contacted me. Mike walks back to my desk and he says, "Hey, you heard about this kid in Colorado?" I said, "No, I'm too busy." And he goes, "Well, you have now, essentially." And next thing you know what, I am talking to Lou Smith. Okay. And he's telling me all the things. This is the first time I've talked about it on the internet tonight. I mean, I've kind of mentioned it, but I didn't really go into the type of detail that we have tonight. And from day one, back then, this was the elephant in the living room.
Mm-hmm.
That was the elephant in the living room. And it was 97. It was October of 97. Here's another one from the LA Times.
Right.
It just came up here. Anyway, it's blocking it, but you can see the date up here, October 97.
But Chris, if I were going in and we were educating or teaching some small or some police department where people didn't have experience with these kind of rare reasons for killing, this is the kind of conversation we would have about signs of sexual sadism and these unusual things. I mean, don't you think, Chris, some of this just smacks of like not having had experience with these kind of things?
Well, that's the whole challenge, right? I mean, that's why even when Lou was reaching out to agencies across the country, okay, he wasn't saying, "Hey, give me somebody with no experience." Okay. He was saying, "This is what we have. Give me your team." And it's a team effort, by the way. Mm-hmm. It's not just one person that sits there and says, "I have all the answers." Okay, I mean, you're fooling yourself. If you're not, all right, they're fooling themselves if they believe that, hey, I can get a juvenile detective and I can get a narcotics detective and I can call them homicide detectives overnight. I spent 13 years in homicide. They sent me to so many schools. I talked to so many people. I read so many books. I had so much experience based on working next to people with a lot of experience. And it just keeps multiplying itself. And then eventually you get the phone call in 97 that says, "Hey, we need you to go help find this sex offender. And here's the problem if you find him." Okay, what do you got, Lou? Okay, well, boom. And they send these pictures, 8x10 glossies, overnight. And it hits your desk the next day. And you're looking at these things and you're going, "Wow, okay, tell me about this. Tell me about that." Okay, well, when you get, like he said, what he did, he said, "Hey, when you get the pictures, give me a call." Okay, I'll call you back. So I called him back and I spent a couple hours on the phone with him. What else do you have? Well, let's find the guy, but if you run into him, you're going to have to talk to him. Okay, not a problem. I need to know what's happening. And when he said, and by the way, it was utilized, 4 separate times, okay, as a device of, fantasy, I thought, oh, okay, I see what kind of guy we're looking at here. And you fast forward that a couple of years, for an example, to Matthew Checky being slaughtered in the bathroom by Brandon Wilson. And I'm standing over him going, "I'm the kid. Use me as a demonstrate from me." Or even before that, because in 92, I had interviewed Wesley Dodd at Walla Walla State Prison. So I was still in the process of everybody's different. And we're always learning, always learning. And in this case, you have Clouseau saying, "Don't, put the body down. I'll pick it up and move it into another room." You can't make this stuff up. I'm not laughing you know, obviously at the victim, I'm laughing at the incompetence.
Right.
And then
But-
everybody comes out and goes, oh, they did everything it was just perfect. And it's the family, it's the brother, it's the mother. Well, what if it's not? What if it's
right.
the elephant in the living room? Okay, final word, Gary.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I'll just say quickly that I always remember I wrote about in New Evil that when investigators went in, I think it was attorneys, went in and talked to John Wayne Gacy about the garroting, he showed them what a garrote does by taking a pen and using it as in place of the stick, right? And then in lieu of rope, he used rosary beads to show on the wrist what would have happened to a neck. I mean, just think about that. Rosary beads to demonstrate what you're, because just in case you wondered if evil is a thing, I think that's a pretty good example of what it's like to be in the room with somebody who's committed evil. What I would say is that I hope that we have helped people understand that there's a reason that expertise in this really dark, awful stuff exists. The reason that people like us read about and study and talk about these kind of things is because when these rare cases happen, and thank God in heaven that they're rare, you need someone who really knows what they're looking at when they're looking at a garrote. We were able in our conversation tonight to break down in a very logical way all of the things that can be deduced from the fact that a garrote was used. If somebody had gone in right away and talked to the people on the ground on day one, I think it would have made the narrative in the JonBenet case move very quickly out of that house to go out into the community and find the kind of offender that would have done this before they got out of Dodge or stopped doing it or whatever. And then what wound up happening, and I think to a certain extent, there are other cases like Delphi and things like that, where you see this kind of thing where it's like time goes on and then all the techniques that you would use to get the offender who really did it are kind of gone up in smoke. Time is lost. Actually, as a point of interest, Chris, John Douglas made the same point about Delphi. That too much time went by, without using the proper technique. And I think that happens because an inexperienced group on the ground goes in, they don't know what they're looking at, and there is a tendency to try to shoehorn the case into the kind of traditional domestic kinds of things that they are used to seeing. And because it's a failure of imagination that comes. And that, I think, causes suffering on the ground to a lot of other families, a lot of people, whatever. But most horrendously, in my opinion, is thinking about the family that then gets accused of being involved. And if they didn't have any involvement, think about how that felt about the mother going to her death with people looking at her askance, that she was responsible for killing her own child and inserting a paint stick and garroting, or that her own son did it, or whatever. Or think about how the brother feels, or think about, and I just think that's reckless. If there's no evidence of that, to go around with certainty saying that and whatever, because that's a kind of a death for the people that are alive, and they're already heartbroken, forever about that this time of year. Think about what it must feel like to John Ramsey every time Christmas comes around, that kind of thing. So, and I know that there are people in the audience who will say, oh, come on, you've bought into the narrative. The family did it. The family was involved. You dumb fool, whatever. You could think that, but where's the evidence? Where's the evidence of that? It's a feeling, but it doesn't match what you and I, Chris, and other people know about the kind of offenders who do this kind of thing. It just doesn't match. And I think that's what I think it's about. It's about that training is needed. Go out to police departments that have never seen this stuff and teach them about it. Chris, you and I, we're involved with the Cold Case Foundation. We're talking about things like, going out to Native American tribal authorities and teaching them about these kind of offenses, right? Grant-funded research to go out, grant-funded work to go out and do that. The truth is, I think there should be mandatory training to departments all over, where people with expertise like ours go out and teach them. Every once in a while, you're going to see something like this. And that's, I think, something that Vernon was a big fan of. That it should be like mandatory training, and that every once in a while, sprinkled in the world of homicides, you're going to see some stuff like this. And that's my take on it, is that it's a failure of imagination and lack of experience, and not listening to people who know what the garrote like this is used for. And the other thing I'll say simply in ending things here is, that I want to wish everybody, if I don't see you all here, I wish you all a beautiful holiday. And, just remember those people who have lost someone, how difficult the holidays are for them. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. For many of us, that's like the most beautiful time of the year, But remember that for some people, it's a time of pain, a time of the empty chair, as I always say, and think about that, and think of the symbolism that, when the Christ child was born, one of the three kings, one of the magi, brought what was essentially something that you would use for funeral. He brought something that would be used to dress a body for funeral, because the whole story of Christmas is a child that was born to ultimately die. And God knows what it is to lose a child. Remember that. Just think about those people at the holiday season, and be a little kind to somebody that's experiencing that loneliness and that loss. And try for just a moment to think of the Ramsey family through that lens, instead of looking at them askance, because the evidence just doesn't support that they had anything to do with this. And their lives have been ruined by people who think they know what they're talking about more than experts. So that's my take, Chris, and I don't know if you agree with that, but that's how I feel about it.
No, I'm not going to disagree with anything you said, Gary. I think my final thought process here is, I'm watching the chat and I see some people, it's suspect that you're sticking up for them. And
Okay.
well, it's not suspect, because first of all, rule number one in any homicide investigation is you don't investigate the person. You investigate the information. And this information, I've, being involved in this from a long time ago, this information speaks volumes. They write books about this information in front of us. They study perpetrators who use this information, like Gacy. They go to people like Gacy and say, tell me about this information. They go to guys like Dr. Brucato and say, tell us about this information. Mm-hmm. And then at the conclusion, they say, or let's say the Q&A comes back of, hey, we've got a mother, a 9-year-old boy, a mother, who cancer is in remission, 4 years. And we've got a father who just, seems out of it in police opinion. The first question is always going to be, how was this information used, i.e. the garrote?
Right.
Well, blah, blah, blah. Okay, was the victim violated, down there in the private area? Yeah, she was. Okay. Well, do you really honestly think, this is what I would ask a detective, do you honestly believe a 9-year-old did this? That a 9-year-old took his sister down into the basement, fixed this type of device, utilized it 4 separate times, And then, or what exactly? Help me understand. And if you believe that, thank goodness you're not investigators. Because you'll never solve a crime, ever. Ever. The internet's a good place to be. Stay there. Okay? Mm. And don't forget, like Dr. Brucato just said, this is a season that right now this case can be solved. It's sitting right in front of us. I guarantee you. If there is additional DNA that's not contaminated, destroyed, upset, hurt, i.e., it's sitting right there on that paint stick. And the Bardol method with Francine Bardol can get it. That's just my opinion. I hope Boulder PD will let that happen. And by the way, we also forget that the whole family has been eliminated as the contributors of the DNA. Go figure. We love you guys. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll see you on the next one. Aloha.
Hard working every day. I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts. Wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah. Make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away. You and me go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a while.